She pointed a gun at me, right in my own front yard in broad daylight. I'm not exaggerating. The HOA president, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, stood less than 10 feet away, hands trembling but finger locked tight on the trigger. Behind her, her $100 000 pink BMW lay crushed beneath the massive oak tree that had fallen from my yard during last night's storm. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some recording on their phones. And me, I didn't move. No fear, no rage. Just that strange, steady calm that comes from experience. Because this wasn't the first time someone had pointed a gun at me. The only difference was, this time the person shaking in front of me wasn't a criminal. She was a homeowners association president who thought her petty rules could intimidate a man who used to stare down real threats for a living, a man who once ran the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And she was about to learn one very expensive lesson: never point a gun at the wrong man. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe for more crazy HOA drama and revenge stories like this one. When I retired from the Bureau, I promised myself one thing: peace. No more stakeouts, no more red-eye flights to Washington, no more midnight phone calls about threats I couldn't ignore. I wanted grass under my feet, a steady morning coffee, and a life where the only thing I had to track was the growth of my lawn. That dream led me to Hawthorne Ridge, a quiet, picture-perfect neighborhood with neat cul-de-sacs, freshly painted mailboxes, and smiling families who waved as if they were auditioning for a real estate brochure. It looked like the kind of place that never made the news clean, calm, controlled. The irony, of course, is that control is the seed of chaos. Within 48 hours of moving, a notice appeared on my front door. Welcome to the community. Please ensure all trash bins are color compliant and stored out of public view. Violations may result in fines. Signed, Karen Hollingsworth, HOA president. The name rang like a warning bell. Every neighborhood has one, the ruler without a crown, the person who treats bylaws like scripture and believes power comes from paperwork. But Karen wasn't just another overzealous neighbor. She was the kind of person who thrived on control. A short, sharp-eyed woman in her mid-50s, she walked with the authority of someone who'd memorized every rule and weaponized each one. When she introduced herself, she didn't shake my hand, she inspected my yard. "You'll need to trim that hedge to regulation height," she said, squinting at a bush that had existed longer than most marriages. "We maintain uniform aesthetics here." I smiled politely. "Of course. I appreciate your dedication." She didn't hear the sarcasm. Or maybe she chose not to. "Good," she said, nodding, like a general after issuing an order. "We keep this neighborhood perfect. The HOA is what keeps the chaos out." She had no idea how many kinds of chaos I'd seen. Over the next few months, I kept my distance. I followed the rules, paid the dues, even attended one of the HOA meetings just to see the circus. Karen sat at the head of the table in the community clubhouse, flanked by her board members, 3 nervous people who spoke only when she allowed it. She wore her power like perfume, strong, overbearing, and impossible to ignore. The meeting agenda: trivialities, dressed as legislation. Item 3. A resident on Cedar Lane is painting their shutters slate gray. The approved palette allows only stone gray. Item 4 involved a complaint about a child's basketball hoop detracting from curb harmony. The crowd nodded as if these were matters of national security. I leaned back silently, cataloging the psychology on display. Karen didn't lead through logic, she led through fear of disorder. It's what most petty tyrants do. Still, I stayed polite. I smiled at her in passing, said good morning, kept my lawn short enough to satisfy her measuring tape. But peace and power can't coexist in the same cul-de-sac for long. It started small, a warning letter about my mailbox paint being slightly faded, then another about my porch light being too bright for community standards. Each letter came signed, stamped, and hand-delivered by Karen herself. I almost admired her dedication to micromanagement. Almost. Then came the car, the BMW. If the neighborhood was her kingdom, that pink BMW was her throne. Custom paint, imported rims, a vanity plate that read Karen 1. Every morning she would polish it herself, dressed in a pastel tracksuit, humming as if the world owed her applause. One afternoon she caught me watching her from my porch. "Beautiful, isn't she?" she called out. "Hard to miss," I replied. "It cost me more than some people's houses," she bragged. "I can tell," I said, and went back to my coffee. From that moment she decided I was difficult. After that, small acts of war began. She sent HOA inspectors to verify the angle of my driveway's drainage slope. She claimed my mailbox was too close to the curb by exactly 1 inch. When I hosted my daughter and her kids for the weekend, she left a note citing noise disturbance after 8:00 p.m., for laughter, not music. It would have been comical if it wasn't so exhausting. I dealt with cartel bosses and cybercriminals. None of them prepared me for suburban tyranny in yoga pants. Still, I let her have her victories. I kept records, filed copies, and said nothing. Silence, I'd learned long ago, was the most unnerving response to power-hungry people. By mid-spring, the weather changed, and so did the neighborhood. The air thickened with humidity, the kind that carries trouble in it. Storm warnings rolled across the evening news, but Karen ignored them. "Our trees are HOA certified," she told the board. "They're safe." I knew better. I'd seen what wind can do when it decides to make a point. That night, thunder cracked like artillery. Rain lashed sideways, bending the trees until they screamed. I watched from my window as lightning illuminated the street, bright, blinding flashes that turned every shadow into an omen. Then came the sound. Crack, thud, scream. I threw on a raincoat and stepped outside. The storm clawed at my face. The oak tree in my front yard, 40 feet tall, roots older than the subdivision itself, was gone, torn clean from the ground. For a heartbeat, I thought it had landed on my roof, but when the lightning flashed again, I saw where it had fallen. Across the property line. Across the driveway of Karen Hollingsworth. Across her gleaming pink BMW. The impact had flattened it like a tin can under a tank tread. The windshield shattered, the hood folded like paper, and the HOA Queen's pride lay buried under bark and rain. I stood there drenched, watching water run off the wreck like melted candy. Part of me felt bad. The other part, the part that had endured months of her passive-aggressive tyranny, thought maybe the storm just issued a citation of its own. By morning, the rain stopped, leaving chaos in its wake. Branches scattered puddles, gleaming the air heavy with that sweet metallic scent of aftermath. Then I heard it, her voice. This is your fault." Karen marched across her lawn, still in her robe, hair, wild face, flushed crimson. She pointed at the wreck like she was unveiling a crime scene. "Good morning, Karen," I said, sipping my coffee. "Don't good morning me. Your tree destroyed my car." "It was a storm," I replied calmly. "You should contact your insurance." She jabbed a finger at me. "No, you knew that tree was dangerous. You neglected it. That tree passed inspection last year. Healthy. Strong. Acts of God aren't my liability." She gaped at me as if I'd spoken another language. "I'm the HOA president," she snapped. "You'll pay for this. I'm sure the insurance company will be thrilled to hear your ruling," I said, turning back toward my porch. The sound she made wasn't human, it was frustration distilled into a single shriek. The rest of the day was theater. She took photos, screamed into her phone, and even staged a community meeting right there on the curb. A few curious neighbors gathered, whispering behind hands. One man asked if the BMW was salvageable. Karen glared at him like he'd insulted royalty. By evening, she delivered the first formal notice of negligence. It was typed, signed, and slid under my door. I read it once, smiled, and filed it neatly in a folder labeled Evidence. The next morning, she upped the ante, calling for an emergency HOA hearing. This resident, she declared in an email blast to the neighborhood, poses a risk to community property. The irony was rich. She called me dangerous because a tree obeyed gravity. Still, I attended the meeting. Old habits die hard. Sitting across from her, I watched her posture, the jitter in her leg, the twitch in her jaw, the desperate need for control leaking through every motion. When she started shouting about reckless disregard for community safety, I leaned forward and said quietly, "Karen, you should stop talking before you say something you'll regret." She sneered. "Or what, you'll file a report?" I met. Her eyes let the silence stretch. "You'd be surprised what kind of reports I can file." She didn't know it, but in that moment the balance shifted. Because, while she saw me as a retired old man with a big yard and bad luck, she had no idea that I still had contacts clearance and a very particular set of skills for handling people who confuse authority with immunity. And if she kept pushing, she was about to find out how dangerous peace can be when you take it from the wrong man. The morning after the storm was the kind of silence that feels fake, the air too still, the streets too clean, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Sunlight glared off the wet asphalt, and birds were already back, hopping along power lines, as if the night before hadn't tried to tear the whole world apart. But peace didn't last long. At 8:14 a.m., I saw the first black SUV roll into the neighborhood, not police, not insurance, but the HOA board. 3 of them, clipboards matching blue windbreakers, and that same hollow authority of people who believe paperwork is a weapon. They parked in front of my driveway, stepped over the debris, and didn't even bother saying hello. The leader, a man named Phil, adjusted his cap and began taking photos of the fallen oak. "We're conducting an assessment of the damage," he said stiffly. Damage to what I asked. To community property. I looked at the tree clearly from my yard, and then at the mangled BMW lying entirely on Karen's side of the property line. Community property, I repeated. Since when did Karen's car become public infrastructure? He hesitated. Mrs. Hollingsworth has informed us that your negligence caused this negligence. I cut in. That oak was inspected. It survived 2 hurricanes and a decade of HOA landscaping reports. Phil shifted uncomfortably. Well, the president believes. Of course she does. Before he could finish, Karen's front door slammed open. She stormed out wearing sunglasses, a floral robe, and fury painted across her face. There he is, the man who destroyed my car. Her voice carried down the street, bouncing off mailboxes and egos. Neighbors appeared on porches like prairie dogs, peeking over fences. I sighed. Morning, Karen. Don't you dare morning me. You think you can just let your death trap fall on my BMW and walk away? Technically, I said I didn't let anything fall. Gravity did the heavy lifting. That didn't go over well. She jabbed her finger toward me. You will replace it, do you understand? A brand new car, exact model, color, and trim. I'll send you the invoice. I'm sure your insurance will love that email, I said evenly. Insurance. She scoffed like I'd just suggested witchcraft. Insurance doesn't cover negligence. You're paying, or I'll have the HOA place a lien on your property. That's when I smiled just slightly, the kind that makes people nervous. Karen, I said quietly, if you're planning to threaten me with property law, I'd suggest reading some first. Her nostrils flared. Are you threatening me? No, I'm advising you. By afternoon, she'd escalated to full-blown war. Emails flooded the neighborhood group chat, urgent community safety notice. Her message claimed my rotting tree was a hazard, that I'd ignored repeated warnings, which of course she'd invented, and that the HOA would be reviewing my eligibility for community residency. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded every message, every photo, every recording to a folder titled Evidence, Phase 1, Old Habits Die Hard. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door, the kind meant to assert dominance. I opened it to find Karen standing there again, this time dressed like she was going to court, pink blazer, pearls, clipboard in hand. Behind her were 2 HOA members looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Hale, she began formally, this is your final notice to accept liability for damages caused by your negligence. I leaned on the doorframe. You're really sticking with negligence. You do know there was a recorded Category 3 storm last night. That's irrelevant, she snapped. You failed to maintain a safe environment, I raised an eyebrow. You want to tell FEMA that? Her lip twitched. The HOA has authority to enforce safety compliance, not across federal weather patterns. You don't. That got her. For a split second, her mask slipped. Frustration flickered through her eyes like static. Then she regrouped, smiled, and said something she'd regret. You think your little government job makes you untouchable? I met her gaze, unblinking. I don't think anything, Karen. I just know how laws work. She exhaled sharply through her nose, then turned on her heel. Fine. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, I'll escalate this legally. You'll be hearing from the HOA's counsel. Looking forward to it, I said, and closed the door. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of the monitor. My walls were lined with files, framed commendations, and one particular plaque that still made my stomach twist. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Director James Hale. I hadn't used that name in a while. Not the title, at least. Out here, I was just Jim from Maple Drive. But the Bureau never really lets you retire. You leave with more than memories. You leave with instincts. And right now, those instincts told me that Karen wasn't just angry, she was building a case. I started digging. I reviewed every HOA communication since moving in, bylaws, meeting minutes, even archived complaints. Patterns emerged. Financial inconsistencies, duplicated contractor invoices, maintenance fees that never led to actual maintenance. It smelled like corruption. Small-town corruption, yes, but corruption all the same. By midnight, I had enough breadcrumbs to make a trail, and I knew exactly who to send it to if things went south. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. Notice of violation, property negligence, and failure to maintain safe conditions. Fine $25,000. Payment due in 30 days. I laughed out loud. A fine larger than most HOA annual budgets. She was either bluffing or desperate, probably both. I walked the letter over to her house. She was in the driveway, talking to a local reporter she'd apparently summoned. The pink BMW carcass gleamed under the sun like evidence at a crime scene. When she saw me, her face tightened. Oh, look who decided to show his face. I handed her the letter. Just wanted to thank you for this. My lawyer's going to love it. She smirked. Your lawyer, good luck. The HOA's attorney is the best in the county. Funny, I said, turning away. I prefer mine in DC. That stopped her. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. DC. What are you implying? Nothing yet. And I walked away. 2 days later, things got worse. Karen ordered contractors on HOA funds to come remove hazardous debris. Translation, chop up my fallen tree without permission and bill me for it. I stepped outside as the chainsaws fired up. Touch that tree and you're trespassing, I said, voice calm but cold. We have HOA authorization, one of them muttered. You have Karen's authorization, not mine. You might want to check which one actually owns the property before you start cutting. They froze. Karen came marching down her walkway, phone in hand. He's obstructing cleanup. Get back to work, ma'am, the contractor said nervously. He says it's his land. His land is our land, she barked. Everything within this neighborhood is under HOA jurisdiction. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. Karen, you just said that on camera. Her face paled. What camera? I pointed to the small black dome mounted on my porch. Smile. That night, she slipped a note under my door, handwritten this time. You've made a very dangerous mistake. I'm not afraid of you. I stared at the words for a long time. Not afraid. That was a lie. People who aren't afraid don't write notes in the dark. Still, something about it made the air feel heavier, the neighborhood quieter. Karen wasn't just angry anymore. She was desperate. And desperate people, I'd learned that the hard way, are unpredictable. I locked the doors, double-checked the cameras, and sat by the window with the kind of unease I hadn't felt since my bureau days. Because deep down I could sense it. This war with the HOA president wasn't about money anymore. It was about control, and control once threatened always bites back. The next few days turned the neighborhood into a stage play written by lunatics. Every morning Karen strutted up and down the street, phone in hand, documenting evidence for her case. She'd pause in front of my driveway, zoom in on the stump where the oak had stood, and narrate like she was filming an episode of HOA Crime Watch. This, she'd say, in her shrill command voice, is the property of a resident who endangered the entire community with his negligence. The HOA will not tolerate this. Sometimes I'd wave from my porch. That only fueled her fury. By the third day, she'd printed full-color community safety bulletins featuring a photo of the fallen tree and distributed them to every mailbox. Across the top, in bold red, dangerous homeowner alert, failure to comply with HOA standards. She even stapled one to the clubhouse notice board. It was comical right until I saw the fine print, pending board review, possible expulsion from the community. Expulsion. From a neighborhood I legally owned property in, I let out a laugh so sharp my dog barked. Karen wanted war. Fine. But she wasn't ready for the kind that didn't involve megaphones and flyers, the kind that operated quietly, methodically, and legally. That evening I attended the emergency HOA meeting she called to discuss the tree incident. I wasn't required to show up, but curiosity and maybe a little mischief got the better of me. The clubhouse was full. Dozens of neighbors, half angry, half entertained. Karen sat at the front like a dictator behind a folding table, gavel in hand. She even had a projector showing photos of her crushed BMW as if it were evidence of a crime. Order, please, she barked, though no one was talking. We are here to determine disciplinary action for the resident at 172 Maple Drive. I raised my hand. That's me, I assume. She gave me a thin smile. Yes, you may speak, briefly. Generous of you, I said, standing up. For the record, the fallen tree was inspected healthy and legally categorized as an act of God. Your insurance should. Don't you dare hide behind insurance, she cut in. This was willful neglect. You endangered my property, and by extension this community. I wasn't aware BMWs counted as community property, I replied dryly. A few neighbors chuckled. Karen slammed the gavel. Enough. You think this is a joke. Honestly, Karen, I said, leaning forward, I've seen hostage negotiations that were less dramatic. Her face flushed crimson. That's it. Effective immediately, I motioned to fine you $50,000 and suspend your community privileges. Phil, the nervous board member beside her, cleared his throat. Karen, that's not seconded, she barked before he could finish. You can't second your own motion, I said, grinning. The room rippled with laughter. Karen's jaw clenched so hard I thought her veneers might crack. You think your government job protects you, she hissed. I know people in City Hall. Then you'll know what happens when they receive a report about financial misconduct. Silence. Every head turned. I continued calm as a surgeon. Your maintenance budget missing $120,000 over the last 3 years. Duplicate invoices, non-existent contractors. I wonder if the IRS would find that interesting. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I didn't come here to argue, I said. I came to give you a chance to stop before this gets ugly. Because trust me, Karen, you don't want to see what ugly looks like. Then I walked out, leaving her in stunned silence. 2 days later, the retaliation began. My mailbox vanished overnight. HOA inspectors parked outside my house for hours, pretending to measure my fence. Someone dumped garbage bags on my driveway. Typical intimidation tactics, petty, juvenile, and predictable. I'd handled international espionage with less theatrics. Still, one evening I came home to find something that made my stomach drop. A dead crow placed neatly on my front step, wings spread like a warning. Attached to it a note in Karen's unmistakable handwriting. You should leave while you still can. I took a deep breath. Not fear focus. Karen had officially crossed from civil dispute into criminal territory. I didn't call the police immediately. No, I did something better. I called Elliot Briggs, assistant director of the Bureau's Field Integrity Division. Jim Hale, he said when he picked up, voice low and amused. Haven't heard that name in a while. You finally missed the paperwork. Not quite, I replied. Got a local HOA president who thinks she's above the law. I might need a background check run quiet and fast. He chuckled. You always did find trouble in strange places. Send me what you've got. By midnight, I had it. Her file. Turns out Karen Hollingsworth wasn't just a suburban tyrant. She'd been fined twice before for fraudulent accounting during her time as treasurer in another neighborhood's HOA. Both times, she'd settled privately to avoid criminal charges. She'd simply moved to a new state and reinvented herself. I smiled. Old patterns die hard. The next morning, I printed the documents and slid them into an envelope marked HOA Board, confidential. Then I left it on the clubhouse doorstep before dawn. By afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Phil and the others looked shaken. Karen was livid. She stormed up my driveway just as I was watering the lawn. You think you can smear me, she shouted. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I do, I said calmly. And I'm giving you one last warning. Stop harassing me. Withdraw the fines, apologize publicly, and we'll call it even. Never, she spat. You're finished here. She turned and stomped off heels, clicking like gunshots against the pavement. That night I barely slept. I wasn't afraid, not exactly, but I knew escalation when I saw it coming. The quiet before the explosion always sounds the same, whether it's a cartel in Caracas or a HOA president with a bruised ego. Sure enough, around 1130 p.m., my motion sensor light flicked on. I glanced through the blinds. A figure was in my yard, small, fast, holding something metallic. Karen. She was trying to pry open my mailbox post, muttering curses under her breath. I stepped out quietly, flashlight in one hand. Evening, Karen. She froze, eyes wide. What the hell are you doing? I asked. She straightened, breathing hard. Collecting evidence. You're hiding violations. Violations, I repeated. You're trespassing on federal property. Mailboxes fall under federal jurisdiction. That word federal seemed to hit her like a slap. She stammered. You can't scare me. Not trying to, I said. But I can remind you that tampering with mailboxes is a felony. Her face contorted into something between fear and rage. You think you're untouchable because you were some cop. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Not a cop, Karen. I was the one who trained them. Her expression flickered. Just for a second, she looked like she'd realized what kind of storm she'd summoned. But pride's a powerful drug. Get off your high horse, she hissed, retreating toward her yard. This isn't over. I watched her disappear into the shadows, and the night swallowed the sound of her footsteps. The next morning, her house looked different. Curtains drawn. No BMW carcass in sight, probably towed away at last. The HOA sign in her yard was gone. For a brief moment, I wondered if she'd finally backed down. Then, just before noon, I found a small box on my porch. No note, no address. I opened it carefully. Inside, a single bullet. Shiny, polished, deliberate. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of irony settling in my chest. Karen had officially declared war. And unfortunately for her, she just declared it on someone who'd made a career out of ending them. There's a particular kind of quiet that happens right before violence, a strange, suffocating stillness that presses against your ribs. I'd felt it hundreds of times before standing in hostage rooms and on tarmacs lit by floodlights. But feeling it again in my own front yard under the manicured shadow of a neighborhood oak tree was something new. It started that morning at 9:17 a.m. I remember because my coffee was still hot and the morning sun hadn't yet burned away the dew on the grass. I was inside reading the newspaper when the sound of tires screeching ripped through the silence. I looked up to see Karen's white Range Rover skid to a stop in front of my house. She jumped out, red-faced and trembling, gripping a manila folder stuffed with papers. "Get out here, Hale," she shouted, voice breaking the calm like a siren. I opened the door slowly. "Morning, Karen. Can I help you?" "You think this is a joke?" She waved the folder at me. "You've been spreading lies about me. Those forged documents you left for the board, do you really think you can ruin me?" I stepped onto the porch, hands, visible tones steady. "I didn't forge anything. The evidence came from public records and 2 prior HOAs you worked for. All factual, all verifiable." She blinked, furious tears burning behind her sunglasses. You think you're smarter than me? Because you used to be some big-shot federal agent. This isn't the FBI anymore. This is my neighborhood. I took a slow sip of coffee. "You should stop shouting. You're shaking." That set her off. "Don't patronize me," she screamed. "I'm not afraid of you," but her eyes said otherwise. Fear and pride are siblings. They look alike when cornered. She dropped the folder onto my lawn, scattering photos and papers. "I have witnesses. I have proof. You've been stalking me. Proof of what exactly? That you threatened me. You harassed me. She paused, trembling, then reached into her handbag. And that's when I saw the glint of metal. The world narrowed. My training kicked in before my mind could. My heart didn't race. It slowed. My vision tunneled into precision. She pulled out a small, silver handgun, compact, polished, civilian, legal maybe, but her grip screamed amateur. She held it too high, one hand shaking the barrel, bouncing with every breath. The neighbors froze. One man across the street ducked behind his car. Another woman screamed. "Karen, what are you doing? Put that down," I said quietly. "You're making a mistake you can't undo." "Don't talk to me like that," she shrieked. "You destroyed my car. You ruined my reputation. You think you can humiliate me and get away with it." "Karen," I said again, keeping my tone level, "look at your hand. You're trembling. If your finger slips, someone dies. Probably not who you think." She took a step closer, the muzzle now only 6 feet away. "I'm warning you. You already warned me. 3 times, I said softly. "That's how many emails you sent threatening to make me pay. I've logged them all. And now you're on camera." Her eyes flicked toward my porch, the black dome camera blinking red. That's when the panic set in. "Turn it off," she screamed, waving the gun. "Turn it off right now." "I can't," I lied. "It uploads directly to the cloud." Her voice cracked. "You're lying," maybe I said. "But do you really want to test it?" The tension snapped like a stretched wire. She screamed and fired, not at me but into the air. The sound split the quiet suburb like lightning. Birds scattered. A car alarm wailed. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, coffee cup still in hand. "Jesus, Karen," I muttered. "You just committed a felony." Her breathing quickened. Her lipstick smeared across her teeth. "You think I care? I'm not going to prison because of you. Then stop digging your hole." She hesitated, a long, shaking pause where I could almost see the calculation behind her rage. Pride fought fear in her eyes, and pride won. She aimed again. "Apologize for what? For ruining my life." "I didn't ruin it, Karen," I said quietly. "You just finally met someone who didn't bow to it." Her finger twitched. I prepared for the shot, not to dodge, but to move fast enough to make sure the next one didn't hit someone else. Then, mercifully, the cavalry arrived. The first sound was the siren, faint, then close, then blindingly loud. Blue and red lights washed over her yard. A patrol cruiser screeched to a halt behind her Range Rover. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn, shouting commands. "Drop the weapon." Now Karen froze, torn between defiance and self-preservation. "This is private property," she screamed. "He's trespassing. He threatened me, ma'am." "Drop the gun," one officer repeated. For a second I thought she might turn it on them. But something, maybe survival, maybe the weight of years of entitlement cracking under reality, made her crumble. Her knees buckled. The gun fell onto the grass with a dull thud. An officer kicked it away and grabbed her wrists, snapping handcuffs around them. "You're under arrest for brandishing a firearm and discharging a weapon within city limits." She twisted, shouting, "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "Not anymore," I said softly. They put her in the back of the cruiser, still shouting, still demanding her rights. The crowd gathered, phones recording. For once, no one spoke in her defense. As the car drove away, Phil from the HOA approached me, pale and sweating. "Jim, we didn't know she'd—" "You did," I said, cutting him off. "You just didn't want to see it." He nodded weakly, muttered something about resigning, and stumbled off. I looked down at the grass, at the spent shell casing glinting in the sunlight. I knelt, picked it up, and held it between my fingers. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. I'd kept calm through hostage crises, bomb threats, and undercover operations. But somehow watching a middle-aged HOA president spiral into violence over her own ego felt heavier. Maybe because this time there was no villain in a mask, just a woman so drunk on authority she forgot what laws actually were. That night, the neighborhood was alive with gossip. Some said she'd been under stress. Others whispered about medication, menopause conspiracies. Everyone had an explanation except the truth. That power, when left unchecked, breeds delusion. I sat on my porch, bourbon in hand, listening to the wind move through the empty branches where my oak used to stand. The cameras blinked quietly, red lights steady, capturing the stillness that followed chaos. My phone buzzed. A text from the local precinct. Suspect in custody. No injuries. We'll need your statement tomorrow. I typed back, send me the report draft. I'll handle it myself. A pause, then the officer replied, wait, you still write reports. Old habits die hard. Before bed, I watched the footage again, frame by frame. The way her hand trembled. The exact moment she realized she'd gone too far. The look in her eyes when the sirens came. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was exhaustion, the same dull ache that comes when justice works but peace doesn't follow. As I closed my laptop, a thought crossed my mind. In my years at the Bureau, I'd seen warlords, hackers, and terrorists. None of them terrified me like the kind of person who believes they're above consequence because no one ever told them no. Karen was behind bars now. But the storm she'd started, the lies, the corruption, the rot in the HOA's foundation that was just beginning to unravel, and something told me this wasn't the last time I'd see her name on a case file. Because when pride meets power, it never dies quietly. They hauled Karen off that morning, screaming like a caged bird, high-pitched, desperate, almost rehearsed. The sirens faded, but her voice echoed through the cul-de-sac long after she was gone. By the time the patrol car disappeared beyond the gates of Hawthorne Ridge, every curtain on the block was peeled open, and every neighbor had already become a witness, a judge, and a gossip columnist. I stayed outside longer than I needed to, letting the adrenaline fade from my veins. The smell of gunpowder still clung to the air, mixed with the citrus scent of freshly cut grass. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler ticked on, a reminder that normal life stubbornly continued even after insanity had just paraded through it. The first knock came less than an hour later. A pair of uniformed officers, younger than the coffee stains on my bureau mug, wanted my official statement. I gave it to them clean and calm, every word measured. They thanked me, promised to keep me updated, and left looking half awed, half intimidated. Word travels fast in law enforcement circles. By afternoon, the precinct already knew who I used to be. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. By the next morning, the HOA had gone into damage control mode. An email blast hit every resident's inbox at 6:02 a.m. The HOA board is aware of the unfortunate altercation involving our president, Mrs. Hollingsworth. We assure you this was a misunderstanding. The board is cooperating fully with authorities. Misunderstanding, I muttered, sipping coffee. Right, because accidental gunfire is just Tuesday in suburbia. 10 minutes later, a local news van rolled up the street. Then another. Reporters had smelled blood. The story hit the morning feed, HOA president arrested for pulling gun on neighbor after storm damage dispute. There it was. My driveway, my porch, my name, blurred out but unmistakable. And Karen, mid-scream, handcuffed, hair disheveled, splashed across every thumbnail. By noon, the HOA meeting chat exploded with panic. Some residents demanded her resignation. Others, the loyal few, claimed I'd provoked her. One even suggested I had planted the camera footage. That last one made me laugh. Paranoia spreads faster than truth. That afternoon, a black SUV parked in front of my house. Not the police this time. 2 men in suits stepped out, no name tags, no nonsense. Mr. Hale, the taller one, asked. Depends who's asking, I said. He showed a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. I smiled faintly. Took you long enough? Sir Assistant Director Briggs sent us. He said you might need some help tying loose ends. Elliot Briggs, old colleague, sharper than a razor, and one of the few people still in the Bureau I trusted. If he'd sent a team, it meant one thing. The situation had escalated beyond local police drama. The agent stepped inside, scanning the room with quiet efficiency. We reviewed the footage you uploaded. She's in deep trouble, sir. Illegal firearm possession, discharge within a residential zone, and multiple threats. But that's not all. They handed me a folder. Inside were financial statements, bank transfers, HOA budgets. My eyes narrowed. She was embezzling. More than that, one agent said. There's evidence of kickbacks from a construction company contracted for community upgrades, fake invoices, ghost projects. Looks like she's been moving money through multiple HOAs for years. I leaned back in my chair. How much? Upwards of 300,000 across 3 states. I whistled softly. And to think she yelled at me for not trimming my hedges. The agents cracked half smiles. We're setting up a joint task force with the state attorney. The media attention actually helps keeps her from pulling strings quietly. Good, I said. Let's make sure she doesn't wriggle out of this one. Over the next week, the neighborhood transformed into a circus. Reporters parked outside like vultures. Satellite dishes bloomed on rooftops. The HOA board resigned one by one, each pretending ignorance. Karen's husband, a man I'd seen maybe twice, gave a tearful interview about stress and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, their lawyer filed for bail, but the bureau had already frozen her accounts. When money stops moving, so does influence. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now knocked on my door, offering baked goods and awkward apologies. Jim, we had no idea she was unstable. Thank you for, not shooting back. My husband said you used to be in the FBI. Is that true? I smiled politely and declined the cookies. True enough. The whispers shifted tone. Yesterday's villain had become today's hero. Funny how quickly public opinion changes when fear leaves the room. 3 days later, Briggs called. She's lawyered up, he said. Claims she was emotionally manipulated by you, that you used intimidation tactics consistent with law enforcement interrogation. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. She's calling self-control intimidation now. You know defense attorneys, he said dryly. But there's more. The DA's office is filing federal charges. She's not getting away with a fine this time. Good, I replied. Because I'm not letting her drag the whole neighborhood down with her. Briggs paused. You could stay out of it, Jim. You're retired. No one expects you to keep fighting these battles. Yeah, I said quietly. But some battles show up on your lawn, whether you invite them or not. 2 days later, I was subpoenaed to testify at her bail hearing. The courthouse was a gray stone block that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Karen was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from her tailored pink blazers. Even through the glass partition, I could see the disbelief in her eyes. Entitlement dies slowly. When she spotted me, she leaned toward her lawyer and hissed something. I could almost read her lips. He did this. The judge reviewed the file, glanced over the firearm photos, then the video footage from my security cameras. Mrs. Hollingsworth, he said, voice cold, this was not self-defense. You discharged a weapon at an unarmed neighbor. Bail denied. The sound she made wasn't human. A guttural broken noise, part rage, part panic. They dragged her out as she screamed that she'd sue everyone. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Someone shouted, Mr. Hale, were you afraid for your life? I looked straight into the cameras. I wasn't afraid, I said. I was disappointed. The fallout was swift. HOA bank accounts frozen. A federal audit launched. Local politicians distanced themselves faster than rats from a sinking ship. Within a week, Hawthorne Ridge had no board, no president, and no direction. But strangely, it felt lighter, freer. Kids played outside again. Neighbors started mowing their own lawns without worrying about Karen's clipboard patrol. I spent my evenings on the porch, reading, listening to crickets, feeling something close to peace again. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street gold, a car I didn't recognize stopped in front of my house. A man stepped out, mid-40s, nervous posture, holding an envelope. Mr. Hale, he asked. Depends. He handed me the envelope. Karen wanted me to give you this. She said it was personal. I didn't open it right away. I waited until he left, then sat at my kitchen table under the yellow lamplight. The envelope was thick, handwritten, the script trembling but deliberate. You ruined my life. You humiliated me. But you were right, I thought. Power made me untouchable. I was wrong. I lost everything because I couldn't admit that. Maybe someday when I get out I'll thank you, but not today. No signature. Just a smear of pink lipstick at the bottom. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my case file. Evidence, perhaps. Or maybe just closure. A week later, Briggs called one last time. Case closed, he said. She's officially indicted. You can rest now, old man. Rest, I said, glancing at the oak stump outside my window. I think I'll plant something instead. He laughed. Always rebuilding, huh? Someone has to, I said. When the line went dead, I walked outside, shovel in hand, and pressed it into the earth where the old oak had stood. The soil was damp, rich, forgiving. I planted a new sapling, smaller, humbler, but stronger at the roots. As the wind moved through its leaves, I whispered, "Welcome home." Justice, like trees, takes time to grow. The week after Karen's indictment, Hawthorne Ridge felt like a town after a parade, confetti still in the gutters, people walking slower, not sure whether to celebrate or sweep. The HOA website went blank overnight. The board's resignation letters piled up like leaves in a drain. With the money frozen and the gavel silenced, you'd think peace would simply flow back in. Peace isn't a faucet, it's a craft. On Monday, a pop-up sign appeared at the clubhouse: Interim HOA, informational meeting. Volunteers needed. I didn't plan to go. I told myself my role ended with the case. I'd planted my sapling, archived, the footage poured the bourbon. But around 6:45 p.m., as the sky turned the color of a bruise, I found myself walking toward the clubhouse with my hands in my pockets and an old bureau habit in my step show up when a vacuum forms. The room was packed. Neighbors who used to whisper were now willing to speak. Evelyn, the retired OR nurse who had quietly kept our block stitched together during storms, stood at the front with a yellow legal pad and the kind of poise that calms rooms. "We need a temporary committee," she said. "Not a board. Not yet. Just custodians to keep the lights on, pay legitimate vendors, and schedule a new election. No power plays, no new rules. Strict triage. Hands rose. Not the usual hands. New ones. A math teacher, a plumber, a young mother with twins in a stroller. Mr. Dunn, who had lived here since the model homes went up, volunteered to be the archivist. A teenager offered to relabel the file boxes because nobody can find anything labeled MISC. The room laughed. It felt like oxygen. I sat in the back, invisible enough, until Evelyn looked my way. "Jim," she said, "you'll help us audit, right?" Half the room turned. I raised a palm. "I'm willing. But I don't want a title." "You won't get one," she said. "You'll get a folder." That was my kind of currency. The folder was heavier than it looked. 3 years of minutes, invoices, and emails, duplicate payments to the same landscaping company under 2 different names, emergency assessments that never turned into emergency repairs, a security consultant who billed $5,000 a month for threat posture reviews that read like horoscope clippings. I've seen shell games run with more finesse in parking lots. I didn't go hunting for a bigger fish. I assumed we'd already caught it. Assumptions are how mistakes happen. 2 days into the audit, I found a vendor name that didn't fit the pattern: Silver Sycamore Property Services. Not the landscaper, not the security consultant, just an occasional facilities liaison who took payments when the board needed to expedite approvals. 2 signatures were always the same: Karen's and the treasurer's. The amounts were small compared to the kickbacks: $1 $200 here, $2 $400 there, but steady. I ran the tax ID. The corporation was registered to a UPS store box in the next county. Its founding date predated Karen's presidency by 6 months. I dug deeper. Silver Sycamore's liaison was also billing another HOA 2 towns over. Then another. The pattern squeezed at my ribs like a hand. It wasn't just Karen. It was a template. I called Briggs. "You might want to widen your canvas," I said. Karen was a personality. "But someone else built a system." He sighed. "You're supposed to be retired." "I am retired," I said. "I'm also a resident. And residents don't like discovering their dues laundered through a watercolor set." He patched in a forensic accountant from a different office, a woman who spoke in neat stacks of numbers. We worked in parallel, her with subpoenas and secure access, me with sticky notes and a highlighter. By Friday, we had enough of a web to name the spider Franklin Coyle, a community compliance consultant who marketed himself to HOA boards as the guy who could make enforcement painless. Coyle had presented at 2 statewide HOA conferences. He knew the bylaws better than anyone because he sold fear to the people who enforced them. When a board aged into laziness or drifted into vanity, he shopped them a service, outsourced the headaches. He then hired liaisons, read himself under different LLCs, and siphoned the convenience fee. Karen hadn't invented corruption. She'd auditioned for it and been cast as the loudest. I took a drive to Coyle's listed office address. Suite 500 sounded expensive. The actual building was a single story with struggling bamboo out front and a lobby that smelled like weak coffee. Suite 500 was a mailbox. On the way home, a late-model sedan slid into my rear view and stayed there. I've done enough counter-surveillance to know the difference between coincidence and curiosity. This was curiosity. It followed for 3 turns past when I slowed and reappeared 2 miles later after taking a cut-through Karen used to love. The driver wore sunglasses despite cloud cover. Amateur hour. At Maple Drive, I kept going past my house, looped the block, then came back from the other direction. The sedan had parked 1 street over nose, aimed toward the exit. I took a photo of the plate and texted it to Briggs, Stringer, or Coyle. His answer came back fast. Neither. State level, nobody tied to a lobbying firm. The kind that rents cars to be forgettable. So the system had a publicist. Good. Let them watch a neighborhood become unmarketable for grift. Sunday afternoon, we held an open audit in the clubhouse. We set up long tables, stacked the files by year, and invited anyone to look. Transparency isn't glamorous. It's fluorescent lighting, bad coffee, and a sign-in sheet. But it starves paranoia. People came. They read. They ask questions like grown-ups. The teenager relabeled the missed boxes as contracts, unclear receipts, duplicate things that make us ask why. The labels did half the work. Halfway through, a man in a charcoal suit walked in like he owned the carpet. Mid-50s hairline negotiating its exit confidence turned up 2 clicks too high. He introduced himself as Gavin North, a regional advocate for community associations. His smile was all canines. "I'm here to help you transition," he said, distributing glossy pamphlets. "We work with associations during leadership changes to ensure stability. We can appoint an interim management company, streamline your enforcement, and keep assessments flowing." "Assessments are frozen," Evelyn said pleasantly. "We're buying time, not services." He kept smiling. "Frozen assessments damage property values. Homeowners panic. Vendors sue. I can make that go away." "Can you make away the duplicative invoices?" I asked from the back. His eyes slid toward me. "And you are a resident with a folder." "Ah, the former lawman," he said lightly. "Saw you on the news. You're popular with a certain kind of audience." "I prefer neighborhoods to audiences," I said, "and I prefer numbers to adjectives." "Why did Silver Sycamore bill us on the same day it billed Ridgeview Estates?" For a fraction of a second, his smile stopped being a choice and started being work. "Who?" he said, feigning a squint at the label. "Coil Shell," I said. "Your firm has represented 3 of his clients. One sued an HOA into handing him enforcement consulting after a manufactured violation spree. Same playbook, same stationery." Gavin's voice softened, becoming the tone salesmen use when they'd like you to sleep through the next part. "You're connecting dots that don't connect." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you brought your own string." The room had stilled. The math teacher took out her phone and started filming, not for the internet, but for the minutes. Gavin saw the lenses shift. He flipped his pamphlet stack closed. "I'll be in touch," he said. "No," Evelyn said. "We'll be in touch. Through counsel." He left without looking back. The door breathed when it closed. We didn't cheer. We went back to our piles. Monday morning, the county posted our special election date. 3 weeks. Evelyn asked me to draft a neutral primer on what boards actually do and what they cannot. I wrote it the way I write reports, verbs first, no adjectives, bullet points that refused theater. We included a new bylaw proposal, no outside enforcement contractors without a 2/3 homeowner vote and a transparent competitive bid. The plumber suggested a conflict of interest clause. With teeth, any contractor discovered to be related to a board member voids the contract and triggers an automatic audit. The lobbyist sedan stopped showing up. A different car did a compact with a dented fender and a driver in a union t-shirt who waved when I waved. I like being watched by people who also have to fix their own heat. 2 nights later, Briggs called again, his tone all business. "We served warrants this morning. Coil's servers are a museum of poor decisions." He kept everything. We found templated violation letters, plug and play down to, "Your mailbox is 1.5 inches non-compliant." He pitched fear as a product. Karen was a loud client, not the only one. "What happens to our neighborhood?" I asked. "You become a case study," he said. "The good kind." You rewrote the response manual. I thought of the teenager's labels, the math teacher's phone, Mr. Dunn's archive boxes, Evelyn's legal pad. Manuals are made of small, boring pages. The best kind. Election day felt like a block party that had taken a seminar on governance. We set up a table for ballots, another for coffee, and a third for questions that took more than a minute. People asked what the reserve fund should be. Answer, months, not vibes. They asked how to appeal a violation. Answer, with photos, dates, no shouting. They asked if the board could ban pink cars. Answer, no, but taste can be taught bluntly by time. The results weren't close. Evelyn won. The math teacher won. The plumber won. The young mother won. Mr. Dunn lost by 2 votes and smiled bigger than the winners. He preferred archives to microphones. The teenager became technology chair by acclamation and refused a title. I shook hands, avoided cameras, and walked home under a sky that looked like it had been washed. At my porch, I stopped. A small envelope sat on the step. No lipstick this time. No bullet. Just a folded receipt from the county plant nursery and a note in a tight, careful script. For the oak, I was wrong about everything but the weather. K. I tucked it into the file. Not as evidence, as sediment. That night, Evelyn emailed the first agenda. 3 items: unfreeze, essential payments adopt transparency rules, schedule a garden day. The third item mattered as much as the first 2. People who plant together defend together. Before I slept, I printed a 1-page memo for the new board, a gift from a man who has seen too many rooms with no windows. Never outsource enforcement to anyone who sells fear. Write rules you're willing to follow yourself. Publish everything. Assume the next president will be worse than you. Design for that. When in doubt, choose community over control. I left it on Evelyn's porch with a paperclip and a smile. I'd thought the twist would be Karen's arrest. It wasn't. The twist was realizing that her collapse left a larger outline on the pavement, one that could only be erased by a neighborhood deciding in 100 small ways to become unremarkable again. Power didn't vanish. It moved from a gavel to a garden, from a threat to a checklist, from a single voice to a quorum. That's the real play. The quiet one. The morning air carried the soft hum of lawnmowers and the distant bark of dogs, the kind of suburban symphony I hadn't appreciated in months. For the first time since I'd moved to Hawthorne Ridge, the neighborhood sounded normal. No shrill HOA emails, no threats folded into envelopes, no Range Rovers blocking driveways like declarations of war, just life quietly resuming. It had been 6 months since Karen's arrest. In that time, the HOA had rebuilt itself from the ground up. Evelyn's leadership turned the chaos into collaboration, and people who once feared board meetings now showed up with snacks and folding chairs. The bylaws were rewritten, the budget audited, and a new rule introduced: no one person could serve more than 2 consecutive terms. Power by design now had an expiration date. The first community event under the new system wasn't a meeting or an inspection. It was a garden day. Neighbors gathered with gloves and shovels, replanting flowers around the clubhouse and trees along the sidewalks. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. For years, the HOA had been obsessed with trimming, pruning, restricting. Now it was about growth. I didn't sign up officially, but I showed up anyway, as usual, quietly. I helped an older couple dig a hole for a magnolia tree, held the post steady, while the plumber's daughter tied it upright with twine. When the last sapling was planted, Evelyn came over, wiping dirt from her hands. "You planted yours yet?" she asked, nodding toward my house. I smiled. "Planted and thriving. It's got more backbone than the last one." She laughed softly. "Good. Maybe we all do now." The following week, I got a call from Briggs. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. Coyle pled guilty. I set my coffee down. To what wire fraud, tax evasion conspiracy to defraud homeowners associations? He flipped on 2 lobbyists who ran the scam with him. He'll do 5 years, maybe more. And Karen, 2 years for brandishing and discharge plus restitution for the embezzled funds she helped move. She's cooperating too. Looks like prison taught her humility. I chuckled. Or maybe she just found a better audience to perform for. Either way, he said, "You're officially off our radar. You can go back to being retired now." "Briggs," I said, "I don't think people like me ever really retire. We just trade gunfire for gardening." He laughed. "Try not to interrogate the roses, Hale." When the call ended, I walked outside. The sun was sharp but kind. The oak sapling I'd planted after the storm stood a little taller, its leaves trembling in the wind like applause. I knelt, brushed dirt around its roots, and thought about the strange poetry of it all. How destruction had become fertilizer, how chaos had bred clarity. Life in the neighborhood slowly shifted back to ordinary rhythms. The same people who once tiptoed around HOA rules now shared lawnmowers, borrowed sugar, waved without suspicion. The board meetings streamed online for transparency became surprisingly boring, and that was the greatest victory of all. The HOA's finances were published monthly, every dollar in, every dollar out. Contractors were vetted, bids were public, and anyone could attend a review session. Accountability had replaced fear, and oddly enough, that made people kinder. I still got the occasional sideways glance, the former FBI director who'd turned the HOA inside out, but it came with respect now, not tension. I'd earned a nickname among the residents, the Quiet Sheriff. I didn't hate it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the houses amber, I noticed a new family moving into the old Hollingsworth mansion. A young couple, 2 kids, a golden retriever. No Range Rover, no smug smiles. Just people trying to start fresh. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house that once symbolized control and intimidation now hosted laughter echoing off its freshly painted walls. The pink BMW had been auctioned off months earlier, replaced by a simple silver SUV. Karen's empire was gone, sold to pay debts she'd once claimed she didn't have. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in sirens, it shows up in escrow documents. A few weeks later, I received a letter. No envelope, just folded paper tucked inside my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable, clean, deliberate, too careful to be casual. Mr. Hale, you won't believe me, but I'm grateful now. Prison is humbling. The walls don't bend for titles or money. I had to share a cell with a woman who used to run a small-town post office. She told me she lost everything because she falsified one number in a shipment log. She looked at me and said, "Power isn't worth your peace." I finally understood what that meant. When I get out, I don't know where I'll live. Maybe nowhere near an HOA. But if you still have that tree, water it for me once. I want something I ruined to grow right. Karen, I read it twice. Not out of pity, but because buried beneath the pride and the regret was something real awareness. The kind most people only find when the walls close in. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same folder as her first note. The one with the bullet. From threat to apology. A complete arc. That night, the new HOA board hosted a small community dinner at the clubhouse. No tuxedos, no speeches, just barbecue laughter and a long folding table filled with homemade dishes. I stood near the back, content to observe. Evelyn tapped her glass. "Before we eat, I just want to say something short." Everyone quieted. "We've been through a lot," she said. "Storms, arguments, fear, and a few unexpected plot twists." The crowd chuckled. But this neighborhood survived because people stopped waiting for someone else to fix things. We took back our home, together. Applause broke out, genuine, not polite. Then she turned toward me. "And we owe a lot of that to someone who reminded us that justice doesn't have to be loud to be strong." I raised a hand modestly. "If anyone deserves thanks, it's Karen's ego. Without her, you wouldn't have rewritten the rules." Laughter rolled through the room. For once, it wasn't sharp or mocking, it was cleansing. We ate, talked, shared stories about how ridiculous things had gotten. Someone even joked about printing t-shirts. "I survived HOA Karen 2025. I said I'd buy one if they made it in black." Later, as the crowd thinned, Evelyn joined me outside. The night was warm, the crickets loud enough to make conversation optional. She handed me a glass of lemonade. "You could have left," she said. "After everything, why stay?" I thought for a moment. Because leaving doesn't teach anyone a lesson. And because peace doesn't happen when you escape the fight, it happens when you finish it. She nodded slowly. "You sound like someone who's been finishing fights for a long time." I smiled. "Maybe. But this one feels different. Less bullets, more roots." She glanced at the oak across the street, the one I'd planted. "Looks like it's taking. It'll outlive all of us," I said. "That's the idea." When I got home, I stood at the window and looked out over the quiet street. Porch lights flickered on, one by one kids' bikes lay in driveways, and somewhere down the block, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed in rhythm with the crickets. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, it was perfect. The chaos had burned away everything fake and left behind something real, a neighborhood that didn't need policing, just people paying attention. And as for me, I finally felt retired. Not because the world had gone soft, but because for once it didn't need saving. Still, I kept the files in a drawer. Old instincts like oak roots run deep. Power built on fear will always collapse under truth. Karen's downfall wasn't caused by a storm or a bullet. It was caused by believing control equals respect. In the end, the community didn't need revenge. It needed honesty, patience, and the courage to take back what belonged to everyone. If there's anything this story taught me, it's that justice doesn't shout. It grows quietly, like a tree rebuilding itself after lightning. The deeper the roots, the harder it is to shake. So, if you're watching this wondering what to do with your own Karen, the boss, the neighbor, the bully, remember you don't fight tyranny with anger. You fight it with evidence, with unity, and with calm. That's what frightens them most. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments, have you ever faced your own HOA Karen? How did you handle it? And if you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe because we're just getting started. The next storm is coming, and you won't want to miss what happens when karma blows back harder than the wind.